The Israeli government has been accused of forcing thousands of African asylum seekers to return home, where human rights advocates say they could face imprisonment and torture. Human Rights Watch says only a handful of these African migrants have been granted asylum in Israel.
The asylum seekers often find themselves caught between two worlds, unable to go home and unable to get into Israel. VOA Scott Bobb talks with On Assignment's Philip Alexiou about their plight.
African asylum seekers at the Holot detention center in the southern Israeli desert. Some 2,000 Africans live here. They can leave during the day, but must report back 3 times a day. Another 1,000 at the Saharonim prison cannot leave. They are among more than 50,000 Africans, mostly from Sudan and Eritrea, who arrived in Israel over the past 8 years.
Scott Bobb in Jerusalem. What do the asylum seekers do during the day, considering they have to report back to the detention center 3 times a day?
Well, the 2,000 that are in this detention center, they go out. Sometimes they just sit outside. They'll ride the bus into the nearest city, which is Beersheba, about 45 minutes to an hour away. A few of them have cars, and they might drive to Tel Aviv to see their families. But mostly they just don't do anything. But the basic purpose of this is to encourage them to leave. It is not to make life fun or interesting or even easy. And that's sort of the unsaid policy. It's actually been said by a few officials that they want to make their lives miserable so that they will elect to leave Israel.
And how long have some of them been there?
Some have been in the country for up to 7 years. The great influx began in 2008, and it peaked about 3 or 4 years ago, and that's what alarmed the government, because there were thousands coming across every year.
Some Israelis say the influx threatens the very nature of the Jewish state. The government built a fence along the Egyptian border to keep them out.
They basically sneak over originally before this fence was up?
That's correct, and some with great suffering. The fence was completed about 2 years ago, but these people still have, according to the United Nations, a legitimate claim to face possible repression, prison, and/or torture if they return.
Well, Israel doesn't really want them in the country, and they're from Eritrea and Sudan, so completely different religions. Is that sort of the primary reason why they really don't want them in the country?
The Israeli government has not specifically said that. We've heard officials say things like they threaten the very fabric, the Jewishness of the Israeli state, which could have religious overtones. The Eritreans tend to be mostly Christian. From Sudan, that's a Muslim country, but there's also a racial factor that some people evoke. But Israel has accepted Ethiopians mostly who do have Jewish roots and are of the Jewish faith, and they have been integrated sometimes with difficulty, but they're integrated into society. So one cannot entirely play that card, but it's out there, and some people feel that it's a factor.
The policy is to, as you say, get them to decide to leave. So why doesn't Israel just take them back?
Well, that would violate all sorts of international conventions. As it is, they offer them up to $3,500 to go back voluntarily, and there are reports that they even have several third countries in Africa where they can go to. And the government's position is that these are economic migrants, people who are only looking for work.
We are determined to remove those who succeeded in entering before we close the border. I want to make clear that these are not refugees. We are talking about illegal workers infiltrating, and we are determined to bring them to justice.
And so this idea that Bill Van Esveld with Human Rights Watch, he has come up with a plan. And what is it that he is suggesting be done? And is it an idea that is getting any traction at all?
Well, he and many other activists, and I should add that there are a number of Israeli groups that advocate for these people, suggest that giving them a 1-year renewable permit to live and work legally in the country, and then when the situation regularizes in their countries of origin, then they can go back.
And so it doesn't look like that anything will be changing in the future. Is that the case, as you see it?
At the moment, there is no sign that the government will change its position, which is still adamantly opposed to their staying.
A tough situation all around, and it goes way beyond that. Last year, the number of refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people worldwide exceeded 50 million people, and that was for the first time since World War II.